Okay, so Renat, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us a bit about regulatory technology and also how you at South Pole are helping companies go climate neutral or even beyond. So, maybe to get right into it, how many companies are already starting to track their own climate footprint, and how can sustainable services be scaled, such as South Pole?
So, how many companies track their footprint? I assume it's the big majority. I don't have the exact figures, but what I can tell you is that of the FT 500 companies, so from the biggest companies in the world, already 30% don't only calculate their footprint, but they do have targets to reduce emissions in line with science. And so we're getting there. We're approaching a majority of companies who actually do it.
Wow, that's great to hear. But I guess being aware of the carbon footprint and actually taking action to reduce it are two very distinct things. So, can you give some update on what companies are actually doing?
That's actually a really good point because indeed, calculating a footprint and setting a target is, of course, an important first step. But then you actually have to start walking and actually meet the target. And at South Pole, we have recently done a study regarding net zero targets, and we found out that nearly 50% of the companies with a net zero target don't really have milestones. So, without milestones, without a plan what to do, your target rings kind of hollow, right? So we have to really improve on that. Nonetheless, I would say it's a massive difference what we see now compared to just like 2 years ago. The amount of companies who are now with us in this fight against climate change has dramatically increased, and I'm really quite convinced that this will very soon lead to tangible action. Now, if not, we have to call them out because just having a target and no action, that is not enough.
Okay, great. It's good to see that so many companies are already taking steps, but I guess at some point we have to accept the climate neutrality as kind of a new normal or the de facto standard. How long do you think will it take until that is the reality?
I think climate neutrality needs to be indeed, as you say, the new norm. It should just be state of the art. And why is that so important? Because climate neutrality brings this quantitative element into your efforts. When you say I'm climate neutral, it means two things. It means I have a target to reduce emissions, and I'm compensating for any remaining emissions so that you're net neutral. And it's important that what happens when you do that is you create a price signal. Because as soon as you are actually paying for your emissions, it means that emitting every ton costs you real money. And that actually then, of course, incentivizes you to decarbonize even more. So a reduction target and a compensation target, they complement each other. And a good climate strategy therefore has both reductions and compensations.
You already talked a bit now about the kind of potential and the incentives that companies will have to go climate neutral or to offer a more sustainable products. So in one interview, you said solving climate change is probably the largest business opportunity of our century. Can you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So one big mistake I always hear over and over again is that when people talk about climate, they talk about the costs to achieve the transition. That's not costs, that's investments. It's profitable investments. And that's where this business case is actually coming from. And look at the country like Germany or my country, Switzerland. What's our core resources? We have startups, we have technologies, we have high tech tools, methodologies, technologies that are profitable if and when the world gets serious about solving climate change, because that's where we compete. So for countries like here in Europe, it's a big opportunity. With the technological innovations we can do and we're doing all the time, we will be the winners when the world finally decarbonizes. And that's now on the big scale, but even on the small scale, there is such a vast array of products which are profitable already today. Think about energy efficiency. Think about new devices on your heating systems. You save CO2 and you save money at the same time. And to unlock that potential, we need to increase the awareness of how simple it is to actually make money by solving the climate. So when next time you think climate, think investments and think profits. Don't think costs.
That's a good statement. I think I'll remember that. So you mentioned already that we have a lot of talent and startups and business opportunity here in Europe, but it's not climate change is not a European challenge, but we also need to think about the entire world. And a lot of projects that you do at South Pole are also directed to the global South. So how can we make sure that these new companies not only stay in Europe, but also address the challenges we have in the global South or other developing areas?
Yeah, absolutely. The name South Pole, the name of my company, stands for climate action, but also for climate justice, because we think, and we, as you just said, indeed the global South, that's where a lot of people are suffering from climate change, and those guys have not really contributed much. So they're suffering from the damage other people caused. And that's clearly unfair, and that's why we need climate justice. And what happens in many countries, and in South Pole we have projects in over 50 countries in the world, many of those project owners or potential project owners are not bankable. They won't just get a loan from the bank to reap the benefits from investments in climate action. So that's where climate finance comes in, and that's what we do. When you compensate your flight, you compensate the emissions of your company or your festival, that money is actually used as capital to unlock emission reductions in developing countries for people who are otherwise not bankable.
You mentioned already that companies can compensate their carbon footprint. So what exactly do you mean by that, and what actions can enterprises take to reduce their emissions?
So again, it's very important to note a credible climate strategy comes with two elements. The one is a robust target to reduce emissions, and the other one is to compensate the remaining emissions. Now, just to be very clear, you should not trade one for the other. It is not good practice to just say, oh, I'm not reducing anything, I'm just offsetting everything. It's not good practice. But it's also not good practice to just have a reduction target and not offsetting, because offsetting, and here comes the important point, by offsetting, we are raising the funds that we need to finance the transition elsewhere. And I can give you a small example. Like you have, for example, a project of ours is in Ghana. Think about this cocoa field where the farmer needs to plant trees to create shade for the cocoa plantation. Now, who's financing that? There is no bankable. He won't get a loan for it. He can hope for a donation perhaps, but it's difficult, right? And here comes carbon finance. We are able to prepay the farmer for planting those trees, taking CO2 out of the atmosphere, and creating a healthier land where he can grow more food. So it's an investment which is financed by those companies who offset their emissions.
Okay, so I remember now again what you said. When we think about climate change, it's not cost, it's an investment. So how big are the investments that we need to take, such as that you already mentioned?
Well, that's a big question. You hear a lot of figures being kicked around, but it's a high figure. It's in the trillions. But keep in mind, if you look at global GDPs, it's not that much either. I mean, let's keep in mind this is investments which will pay back big scale in many ways. First of all, indirect returns. For example, if you invest in solar power plants or in a new building with a better insulation, and you get that money back over the years. But it's not only the direct benefits you get. Of course, much more important is the benefit we are getting by simply lowering the amount of climate change we will see. And what I find very important here to note, climate change is not like either we basically stop it or we don't stop it. It's worth fighting for every centigrade. It's 2 degrees is better than 2.1 degrees, is better than 2.2 degrees. It's worth fighting. Each and every ton of CO2 is worth fighting for, because each amount we can reduce greenhouse gases means less damage, less refugees, less storms. So it's really a fight that we have to fight together. And even if right now it looks like difficult and emissions go up again, we should really not fall into despair, but continue the fight for all these investments, make them happen.
So it sounds like a lot of money. Is all of this money already available, or do we need to unlock some secret resources, and where do we get that money from?
See, that's a very good and question. The world at the moment is awash with cash. Banks, governments are printing money every day, right? So there is a lot of assets seeking for return opportunities. So the problem is not the amount of money. The problem is the risk appetite this money is willing to take. And there we have to rethink, because a lot of these projects I was talking about, especially in the global south, they have a different risk return profile than what you're usually seeing. So what we actually have to do, we have to ensure that the money which is ready to invest, actually finds its way into those projects. And that's once again what our company South Pole is trying to do. We are creating investable projects in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, so that that money can actually has somewhere to go. We have to create those investment opportunities. Otherwise, even if the money is actually around, it still doesn't flow where it's supposed to flow.
Okay, so you hinted already at some challenges that we have to direct the money where it needs to be. Do you see any other technological, regulatory, or even financial hurdles to unlocking that money?
Well, many of them. One which we have to just be aware, sometimes we think that it's enough to just wait for governments to create the rules. That was an interesting thought all the way through. Governments create the rules and private companies then follow. That just doesn't happen. To be honest, I'm now in this since 20 years. I've never seen a single case of a government which would come up with climate rules against the industry, the interests of its own domestic industry. It just doesn't happen. So what does it mean? We have to go step by step and involve private companies, industries, and bring them into our team, make them part of the quest to finance climate actions, ensure that they have vested interests in the solution, because then the lobby power will change. Instead of lobbying for fossil fuels, all of a sudden those companies start lobbying for higher CO2 prices because they make money with it. So that's what we have to enable this environment where governments and companies and of course society go hand in hand and really start circling upward towards higher carbon prices, which make those investments much more profitable.
One thing that unfortunately is it's a topic that is still relevant in the global south is corruption. So how do you make sure that the money that we invest or that you invest in these projects, especially in the global south, really go to the people that do the project and are not kept by some people that maybe should not keep that money?
That's a very good question, a very important question. One of the key things, the key roles our company South Pole actually has, when I say we develop a project, what it means is we have offices across the globe, and our role is to find the entrepreneurs, the NGOs, the companies on the ground who have a track record, who are credible, who have been lifting up a successful pilot, and we scale them. But throughout all those times, the important thing is with climate finance, the carbon credits you are getting from a project, they don't come at day one. They come every year when your project is running. So we have a massive interest at South Pole to only choose the projects of which we are very sure that they're going to survive for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. So it's baked in the model. We simply cannot afford a project where somebody goes and takes the money, because we are not making any money with that. We are only getting paid once the project actually functions. And therefore, once again, we have a very, very strong interest to make absolutely sure that we're only working with the best in class entrepreneurs. Now, the good news is there are many of those available. Go to Uganda, go to Indonesia, go to Paraguay. There's a ton of great people, very, very smart. They have absolutely great projects. The only thing is they lack capital to get rolling. And we can find those guys and make sure they're kicking off and ramp up their projects.
So to end this interview on a positive note, can you give us one example of one project that you are particularly proud of or that had a particularly positive impact that you would like to share?
One project I'm really proud of is a project we're rolling out in Uganda, Kenya, and Malawi, and it's about water purification. The problem there is that if you just drink the water straight from the well, you're getting sick, and people know that. So what they do is they cook that, they basically light the fire and boil the water. And that, of course, costs a lot of trees. So with a number of NGOs, we were rolling out purification devices at the wells, which purify that water, and of course then stop the burning of all these trees. But the beauty of that is, this is not only a project that reduces CO2 emissions, it's of course improving the health of people, and that's why people love it. And perhaps to end on that note, climate action is not only good for the climate itself. We have many, many examples where climate action also protects biodiversity, creates jobs, enhances health, creates clean water. There's all kinds of side benefits that you get when engaging in climate action. And when I say climate action is the biggest business case, I haven't even calculated those side benefits. So the business case is actually even bigger than from climate alone. So long story short, it's really an exciting topic. When you think climate, think business, and think sustainable development, it's really a quest worth fighting for.
Perfect. I think we couldn't have finished this interview any better. So thank you so much for taking the time again. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the Impact Festival.
Thanks for having me, and great festival indeed.